All right, let's dive into an SMB sales process. Now, for any of you that are hopping into this video cold, this is a series of videos. So you basically walked into, I believe this is video number 4 of this series. So there is a playlist my team would have put together in my channel. So what I would recommend is, if you're hopping into this video cold, go back and watch the rest of those, because everything kind of builds on the previous video. So this entire series is effectively to be consumed in chronological order. You don't have to, but I'd recommend that, because then you may miss things, right? So I use certain terminology, certain language, and all of that kind of feeds in. So there will be a link in the description to the kind of master playlist, so you can view all of those. Or open a separate tab and pull those videos up. What I would also recommend for everyone watching is take tons of notes. Like, this is not your YouTube video that you watch for 2 minutes and then click off. This is one of those videos that you got to sit down, and I'd recommend that you pretty much just binge watch this entire series. Grab a notebook, take tons of notes. You can download the slides and the assets, create copies for yourself, annotate the hell out of it. Okay, so treat this almost like a mini course, and give yourself the time to digest this content, because that's how this content is going to stick. What I will also say is this video is probably one of the key videos in this entire series. Sales process will make or break your sales career, right? The process is so freaking important. One of the things that I've seen that a lot of reps get wrong, and I'll be honest, when I was a younger sales rep, I bobbled this plenty of times too. Is understanding, where am I in the sales journey? Do I have a legitimate deal? And how do I know where to go from here? How do I logically close this deal out? These are all challenges that a lot of younger reps face, because I face them. And a big reason for that is just because of a lack of information. There is such a lack of information around modern sales process. So what I'm going to share with you today works. So this is the sales process that I used to run when I was at Gartner, when I was at CrowdStrike, when I was at Zscaler, and I have been a top rep in multiple organizations. I have smashed my quota multiple times. I've been all the awards, all the good stuff, all the commissions. And a big part of that, right, is not because I was charismatic and had the gift of the gab. No, it's because I knew how to run effective, tight, well-controlled sales processes. And that is going to make the difference between winning and losing in tech sales. So if you're an SMB account executive, I typically class SMB, it really depends on which territory and which part of the world you're selling in. I know that in some parts of the world, for example, the US, SMB might be classed as 500 to 1,000 seats, right? But in Australia, that would be classed as a mid-market organization. So I would broadly say SMB is everything below 250 seats, right? When you start getting above 250 seats, we're really starting to get into mid-market territory, because you're going to have a little bit more complexity in your sales cycle. 250 to 1,000 seat organizations, almost 250 to 1,500 seat organizations, they're quite similar in traits, right? There's usually going to be, by the time an organization's 500 seats, they're going to have a CIO of some sort, right? So it's not just going to be an IT manager reporting directly to a CFO, reporting directly to the CEO. It's usually going to be a CIO. The CIO will usually be a peer. So things start to change. But for the sake of this video, we're looking at sort of sub 250 seat organizations. The process is different. So without further ado, we're going to go into the creating part of the sales process. And the reason I shared this first, before I go into my process for SMB, this slide over here is effectively my process that I would run textbook for SMB organizations. But I want to quickly share how to create a sales process, because this is a really important skill. I've had so many friends reach out to me and say, dude, like our company does this, but I don't know how to structure a sales process, and I don't know how to make sense of this, and I don't know what kind of journey to guide them through. And it's like, how do you do that? Well, this is how you do that. So let me just quickly walk you through this, and then we'll go into what that ideal sales process looks like if you're selling to an SMB organization. Quick shot of caffeine. All right. So obviously it all starts with securing a meeting with some high quality outbounding or some inbound, but more often than not, it's probably going to be outbounding. If you haven't watched the videos on prospecting, that is in the playlist. Load that up, watch that one next, finish this and then watch that one next. But we're assuming that you've secured your meeting. So the first part of this sales process, right? I've basically just put the outcome of what you're trying to get to. Typically, this is going to be with a discovery call, right? No brainer. What you're trying to find is pain and urgency, and you're trying to pitch a compelling proposition to create excitement on the discovery. Now, I'm not saying you show up and you literally do like a 40-minute pitch. That is not the point of a discovery. The point of a discovery is to find pain and urgency, and then you give them like a little mini teaser. You give them like one slide. One of the things that I used to love to do when I was at CrowdStrike was I would literally have like a CrowdStrike platform slide. Or when I was at Gartner or even at Zscaler, I would just have like a single slide that talked about the organization as a whole, right? And so the idea there is you basically want to find pain, find urgency, and then give them a mini value proposition of this kind of overview of your organization, and then at a very high level pinpoint a couple of things, right? So you say, hey, you said your pain was X. Look, here is all the stuff that we do, but I really think what might be valuable for you would be this area and this area and this area, right? So that's really what you're trying to do with the first stage, which is you want to establish pain and urgency. I talk about needing three things to get a deal done, okay? You need pain, you need urgency, and you need power. If you don't have pain, you effectively don't know so I'll share this framework with you later, and I'll share this document with you later. It's something that we used to use at Zscaler. It's called the 3 whys. Why anything, why now, why us, right? And so the pain and urgency answers why anything and why now. So if you don't know why anything, that literally means you don't know why you're speaking to this person, okay? I see a common thing that I've seen a lot is people would come in inbound and say, I want a demo. Even worse, I've seen inbounds coming in saying, I want a trial. No context. And reps will sometimes go, yeah, okay, well, if you want a trial, I'll give you a trial. But it's like, dude, why are we having this conversation? Why are we doing this trial, right? Like, hey, what is driving you reaching out for a trial? Just so I can configure the right things in the trial. That's how you flip that around and try to very quickly ascertain why anything, AKA pain. The other part as well is, hey, I'm just curious, like, why are you trialing this now, right? Like, do you guys have a renewal coming up? That very quickly will help you establish, is there urgency? Like, what is the urgency? Is it a renewal of an incumbent solution? Are they currently in the market for a solution? Do they have an audit coming up? Do they have a commitment to the executive? Do they have a cyber insurance requirement? Do they have, like, what is driving the urgency, and what does that urgency look like? So the goal of a discovery phase, just move that. The goal of the discovery phase is you've got to find these two things, man. You have to find pain and you have to find urgency. You can also, in that discovery phase, do a very small mini pitch. And the idea there is, I always like this analogy of anything that you chase runs away. Anything that you create a little bit of intrigue with, that they lean in, right? So what you want to do is establish a bunch of pain, establish a bunch of urgency, and then get them excited with a little mini value prop. And then they go, ooh, that's really interesting. I didn't know you guys did that. And you go, more to come, right? Hey, there's more to come. And that's really what leads to the next stage, which is demonstrate capability and validate high-level alignment. Now, again, I'm talking to you in terms of stages. When I've actually mapped out the sales process, I break down the exact modality, right? So stage 1, execute discovery. Stage 2, execute demo, validation event. I'll go into what this looks like, right? Don't worry. But what I'm trying to help you understand here is the conceptual value that needs to be met in each of those stages, the conceptual metrics that need to be met in each of those stages, right? So what I see going wrong is people don't really have any idea of what they're trying to achieve at different stages. They show up to a discovery and they pitch. It's like, well, that's not the point of a discovery. The point of a discovery is not to show up and throw up a bunch of stuff. The point of a discovery is to discover, right? Is to find some information. Well, what information are you trying to find? Pain and urgency, right? What is the pain that they're trying to solve? The impact of not solving it, the metrics around the current state and how that pain is impacting them, and then the urgency of like, what is the driver? What is the why behind the driver? And this is something a lot of reps get wrong as well. And again, we'll get into this when we go into the discovery side of things. But when we talk about urgency, I've heard reps say, yeah, the customer has to buy by this date. Okay, like why? Like, why does that date matter? It's good that you have a date. It's good that you have a time, an arbitrary time frame that the customer has told you, but why does that arbitrary time frame matter? Like, what is the why behind that time frame, right? So if we go into the second stage, demonstrate capability and validate high-level alignment. So what we're trying to do here is you want to have a really compelling demonstration. If you don't have a physical product, and I will probably do a variation of this for services sales, because when I was at Gartner and when I was at another company called Adapt, which is a direct Australian Gartner competitor, I was selling intangibles. So I was selling stuff that didn't exist technically, right? We were selling the outcome. We were selling the dream. We were selling the possibility of what we could do. So demonstrating capability, if you have a software, it's quite easy because you should be able to do a demo. That's pretty straightforward. But if you're selling intangibles, I'll do a separate video on that so we can talk about how a services sales process looks like. But in this kind of bucket, there's a couple of things that happen. So one is you do the demo. Two is you want to qualify viability. So assuming that in the discovery phase you have pain and urgency, you then really want to start getting into the power piece, right? And so I would usually bucket budget and authority into that power piece, right? So I use power, like I like threes, that's why I say pain, urgency, and power. But really what power means is, do they have the money? Can they actually spend it? Is the person that I'm talking to able to pull the trigger and actually make a buying decision? Or does he or she have to go and bat for budget with the CFO or the executive, right? How much sway do they actually have? Can they actually move roadblocks out of the way and get us access and get that money, deployed? Like, this is really what that power question comes in. So in the second broad area of the sales process, which is demonstrating capability and validating high-level alignment, not only do you want to have a compelling demo, but you also want to start to qualify that stuff, man. You want to qualify budget, right? So a good way to do that, and I'll show you how to do this, is asking the budgeted project question, right? So this is something that I would usually ask in a discovery. At the end, I would literally just say, hey, is this an exploratory exercise, or do you, is this a budgeted project? Is this something that you and the team have to deliver on? And that's a very nonchalant question, but if they tell you, yeah, this is a budgeted project. I remember one of my biggest deals that I did, I asked that question at the end of the discovery when the CIO came at me hot. Like, he was like, how do you do this? How do you do that? How do you do this? And I was just like, dude, pump your brakes, did a little bit of discovery, gave him some value. And then at the end, I was like, hey, what's the nature of this? Like, what's driving this? Is this something that's committed to the board? Is it a budgeted project? And he was like, this has board level visibility. It has to get done. My job is on the line. I was like, okay, like, I'm dealing with the CIO. The CIO has direct access to the board, and he's just told me this has to get done, and it has their eyeballs. Now, of course, I'm going to be cautiously optimistic with that information, but when you go through the qualification process and you kind of qualify that power piece, you will very quickly figure out how realistic this deal is. And it's important that you do this at this stage, right? So what I usually like to do is I will give them a little bit with the demo, because that creates intrigue, that creates further value, that starts to validate that the solution is how they envision solving their problem. And if you have a great solution, it's a good opportunity for you to kind of show it off a little bit as well, because again, you want to create intrigue, you want to get them to lean in. The moment you have them leaning in, then you can start to unload some of those questions to really start to shit test your deal. Is this a legitimate deal? So at this stage, you get them to lean in, and then you start to qualify your deal. Then we establish the approval process and figure out some sort of validation event, which leads us to the next broad stage or broad bucket of the sales process, which is validating capability and validating viability completely. So what this looks like, and again, I'll go into this in a bit of detail when we really get into the SMB sales process, but there's a couple of key concepts here. If you're selling software, and even if you're selling services, you can do what's called a proof of value, right? So I don't like to use the word proof of concept, because the concept is validated, right? Like, so the especially if you've had software that has already been sold, the concept is validated. The value is what you're trying to validate for the customer. So even the language matters, right? So I don't ever say, hey, it's a proof of concept, it's a proof of value. Let's prove the value to you. So in this validating viability and capability completely stage, there's a couple of things that happen. Firstly, if they want a proof of value, then I use this as an opportunity to get executive access. And I'll show you how to do this, but typically how you do this is with what's called a go or no-go meeting. This is something, I'll just highlight this, the go, no-go meeting. This is something that I learned during my time at CrowdStrike. And it might seem a little bit tedious. I know a lot of reps that tried to skip this part of the sales process. And what it led to was a drastic drop in close rates, because they were skipping over something incredibly important for the success of their deal. The idea behind the go, no-go meeting is if your prospect wants a proof of value, they want to test the software, then you essentially use the carrot, right? They want the proof of value. You essentially use the carrot to say, hey, let's get executive access to make sure that we're all on the same page before we deploy a bunch of resources and you deploy a bunch of time to test this software. I will show you how to phrase this, when to phrase this. Does it work every time? No. Does it work a good majority of the time? Yes. And if it doesn't work, is there workarounds? Absolutely, right? There is absolutely workarounds. Sometimes you may just not be able to get that executive access. Sometimes your champion might just be really nervous to go to that level, which in itself is a bit of a red flag, right? Like if they're truly a champion and they're truly on board and they've committed this to the business and they're going to get this done, they should be able to get you executive access. But if they can't, for whatever reason, right, maybe the CIO or maybe the CFO is on their freaking deathbed and they can't dial into a meeting. Who knows, right? There are ways to get around this. One of my favorite tools that I like to use is a letter of intent. So the idea is the go, no-go meeting or a letter of intent. It's all about making sure the executive, that is the ultimate decision maker, the ultimate yay or nay, right? There is someone in this business that you are selling to that can say yes or no, yay or nay. There's always someone. There is a final person that it's like, it crosses their desk and they either said, yes, we'll do this, or no fucking way, we're not doing this. You have to find that person. You have to find that person. If you don't have access to that person in some capacity, you're fucked, okay? You're not always fucked, but you're leaving your deal to chance. You're leaving your deal to, effectively the sales gods. And that's a bad place to be. So I will show you how to get access to them. The next part of this is once you have done that go, no-go meeting, then you can execute the validation event. And the validation event is usually a proof of value. Not always though. And this is where a proof of value could be one of the ways. The other way you could do it, and I've had this happen, is you could do more of a reference call approach, right? Like I've had customers come on board where they said, look, I know your tech is good. I know your tech is good. Like, people have told me your tech is good. Reddit tells me your tech is good. I'm not worried about the tech. I just want to speak to a couple of customers. And so in that situation, I've basically said, okay, well, if you don't want a proof of value, that's fine. I can connect you with a couple of customers, right? And so again, you can still use the go, no go meeting approach. You can basically say, hey, look, prior to me kind of taking up customers' time and moving this forward, which is a bit of a commitment, and the business is quite, the business that I work for, this, is quite hesitant around doing this all the time. My ask is we need to have a bit of a conversation with you and anyone else involved in the final approval process to make sure we're all on the same page prior to pressing the button on those reference calls. So you can still use the go no go meeting approach for reference calls. But ideally, the go no go meeting works perfectly if you're doing any sort of proof of value type, activities. Anything that's around, giving them software and making them test it, it's a good stage to use. So you then execute your validation event. Like I said, you have multiple validation styles that you can use, right? Proof of values, reference calls, etc. And look, sometimes with bigger deals, I've had to do all the above. I've had to do, organize a call with our CTO so that like they can talk them through the roadmap. I've had to do multiple reference calls, and I've had to do a proof of value. Like, it's like, you got to understand, you got to be a little dynamic with this process. But once you do that, you then want to make sure, well, actually not once. If you see here, I've actually got these two buckets concurrently, right? So I've got them kind of concurrently sitting there. The best practice process is, while you're doing that viability and while you're validating capability, you also kick off the commercial process in the background. And what I mean by commercial process is, effectively in this stage where you're demonstrating capability and validating high-level alignment, you've gotten pricing out of the way, right? So you've established your good, better, and best pricing scenarios. Don't worry, I'll show you how this looks. And I've even created some decks in terms of how to actually present this. But you've gotten your pricing out of the way, so that once you're in this kind of phase over here, and maybe you're running your proof of value, you also send through the official quotes. You also send through legals, your MSA, any terms and conditions, all of that. So the idea is you're running two streams at this point. You're doing a technical validation / potentially a business validation with reference calls, and then you're kicking off the commercial process and sending them the quotes, and you're getting this underway. What this leads to is your ability to close the deal very softly. One of my favorite close methods that I used to use consistently at Zscaler, at CrowdStrike, at Gartner, was I would effectively use what's called the post-sale, pre-sale close. And essentially what that looks like is, if everything is going well in the proof of concept, I would basically just say, hey, are you guys ready to move this into production? And what that basically means is, are you ready to sign off the contract, and let's turn this into a live environment? And that is a great way to softly close deals. But again, in tech sales, closing starts at the discovery, okay? Because for you to be able to close, you need to have access to the right people and the right information, so you know if you have a legitimate deal. The sales process will help you take the customer on that journey. And then the post-sale, pre-sale, and some of these tactics that you can use at the end, that's really what nudges the deal from 95% to 100%. But if you haven't done the freaking groundwork to take it to 95%, you're not closing shit, right? Like the Hail Mary, hey, when are we getting this deal done? Hey, when do you think we can kick off? Like, you can't ask those questions until you've done the groundwork. So in tech sales, it's not about a one-call close, unless you're selling a very volumetric solution that is extremely low ticket. And in that situation, you're probably going to get automated out of your role, right? Because if the ticket price is really low for your software or your technology, why the hell do they even need you to sell them, right? So anyways, I digress. That is what a high-level sales process looks like. Now, what I will show you on the next slide is what that looks like specifically for SMB. Okay, so what are the specific elements of those sales process that you can start to run? So what does that sales process look like? for a sub 250 seat account. Now, like I said, I class anything below 250 seats as SMB, right? Like so not even SMB, just SB, like small business, right? Like that's a small business. The process does change when you start to get a bit bigger. So here are the typical characteristics. Now, before I dive into the process itself, I need a scene set. I need to share a couple of things with you. So again, stick with me here. But here are the typical characteristics of a sales cycle for a sub 250 seat account. This is not a hard and fast, okay? I have done deals with sub 250 seat accounts that were quite sizable, right? Like I've definitely done deals that aired close to multi-million-dollar type engagements across multi-years for sub 250 seat accounts. Like that is very possible. Especially when we start talking about like sub 250 seat account tech companies, right? Like, you know, you have like a tech company that's maybe 200 people. There may be like a banking platform or some sort of really cool, innovative AI startup that, well, not really startup at that point, kind of like a scale up. Like you can get some companies that are pretty well funded or doing quite well in terms of revenue, and they will spend big dollars. So again, be careful when you start to bucket all businesses into one, but largely, this is very common for the sub 250 seat organizations. So typically, the champion, aka the CEO of the problem that you solve, is usually also the economic buyer. So I'll give you an example of what this could look like. If you're selling to like a 50-seat organization, you can reach out directly to the managing director. You could reach out directly to the CEO. In that situation, the CEO of the problem is going to be the economic buyer, right? Like, and so, by the way, this terminology, CEO of the problem, what I mean by that is for the problem that you solve, there is going to be someone in that account who owns that problem. Not always, because they may not have that problem or they may have already solved it. But if they do have that problem, there is someone in that account who, or a couple of people in that account for a smaller account, who owns that problem. Like they are actively thinking about how the fuck do I solve this thing? So the champion, your champion is oftentimes in these smaller accounts is usually the CEO of the problem and also the economic buyer / the person that can say yes and pull the purse strings open, right? If that isn't the case, right, which leads me to point 2, if that isn't the case, usually your champion will report directly to the EB or the economic buyer. So I'll give you another example of this. If you're dealing with a sub 250 seat account, let's say that they have a CIO. For a company that small, usually a CIO doesn't have budget delegation. So they may be able to say yes, but they still have to go conditionally get approval from the CEO. In that situation, you're dealing with a champion that is directly tied to the economic buyer. And so access does become a little bit easier, right? When we start talking about large enterprise accounts, completely different, right? So they budget differently. They have pockets of money sitting all over the place. They have random innovation budgets and this budget and that budget. That's not the case. When we're dealing with smaller accounts, it's pretty straightforward. So if your champion isn't the economic buyer, then they usually report directly to the economic buyer. Makes your life a little bit easier. Typically, it is a very simple legal and procurement process. Again, this is not hard and fast. I have done some deals with small organizations and it has been a complete nightmare to get freaking deals done because of legal and procurement. It goes down to the nature of the organization, how they procure. Like, for example, if you're selling to a local council, it can be a small local council, but it can still be freaking annoying. I've done deals with local councils. I've done deals with local government. They may be small, but the procurement process can be tedious, right? So again, not a hard and fast, but more often than not, I would usually say if you're selling to a small corporate organization, if you're selling to a small company, the legal and procurement is usually a lot simpler. Typically, no procurement function involved and limited or no need for complex evaluation process. Again, typically, government is the exception to this, right? There are small government bodies, God forbid you're selling to FedGov, like Jesus, you're screwed. Like if you do have a procurement process, there'll probably be some sort of centralized procurement function that is a shared service across multiple federal government bodies. So even if it's a small FedGov body, centralized procurement might say, hey, we got to go out to market, we have to go out to tender, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. But if you're selling to a business, a small business, this is not usually the case, right? Like, because they can't afford to hire procurement people. Like, essentially procurement's job is to make your life difficult as a vendor salesperson. And if it sounds like I hate procurement, I do. I've only ever met one cool procurement person. And they were actually really good. But minus that, procurement's job is to make your life difficult. So if you're selling to a small business, thank you, lucky stars. Unless it's Gov, you're most likely going to get away with a very light procurement process, or if not, no procurement process. Also, typically, the CEO/MD is also the chairman of the board. So if they have an incorporated entity, a PTY Ltd, in the US, I'm not sure what you'd call it, an LLC, I'm not sure. But in Australia, right, like if it's a PTY Ltd, a private limited, the CEO and / managing director is usually also chairman of the board. If there is a board, it's usually small, decisions are made fast, typically, right? Small businesses, they're pretty nimble, man. They get things done quite fast, right? And I've sold in large enterprise, I've sold in like medium level organizations / commercial organizations, and I've sold to small companies. By far, I enjoy small, medium businesses, right? Small and mid-market businesses, because things get done a lot quicker and you can do pretty decent sized deals, right? Like there's this fallacy that you can't get multi-million-dollar deals done with small organizations or mid-market organizations. Not true. If you can find a big enough problem, you can get serious dollars out of them. So what does that mean for you as a sales rep? Well, for one, you want to have a simple process to qualify pain and urgency early. That is the key operative word over here. You want it, like if it's a small business, you don't want to fuck around and waste time. Like you want to qualify business pain and urgency as quickly as possible. And the best stage to do that is the discovery and the demo, right? So you get the foundational pain and urgency in the discovery, you get the deeper level pain and urgency in the demo. So very quickly, if you, in like 2 calls and 2 meetings, if you have a legitimate deal or not, which is what you want to do. The next thing is you want to qualify budget viability early, right? And this is that part that I talked about earlier in the video around like the 3 things you need to get a deal done: pain, urgency, and power. And I categorize budget within power. It's the broader idea of delegation. If they can pull the trigger, who pulls the trigger? How much delegation do they have? Do they need to go get additional funding? Can they fund it themselves? Do they have to sell their grandmother's kidney to get this deal done? Like you want to qualify that stuff early in a small business account executive role, because you don't have time. You don't have time to like go through multiple calls and meetings and then get to the end and be like, oh geez, okay, you can't afford our solution because you guys are too damn broke, right? You want to build urgency and excitement through stellar demonstrations and pitches, right? So you want to, like, small business sales is about volume and pace. Time kills deals. Like, brand that in your mind. If you're a first-time AE, like, I get nervous when first-time AEs take their sweet time to get deals done. I'm like, you need to be moving this deal at a good pace, not an artificial pace. Don't force the customer when they're not ready to move. But if they're ready to move, you move, right? So one of my early sales mentors, my old VP at Gartner, he used to say there was this idea of crawling, walking, jogging, and running. If the customer is crawling, then you crawl with them. If they're walking, you walk with them. If they're jogging, you jog with them. If they're running, you better be fucking running with them. I've had deals where prospects have come to me and I was kind of in that walking pace, but the prospect was trying to go just fast. And if they're trying to go fast and there's genuine intent and reason for why they're trying to go fast, don't slow them down too much. Match their pace. Ask the questions you need to ask, validate the deal as quickly as they're trying to get information out of you, and then very quickly ascertain, do I have a legitimate deal here? And if you do and there's legitimate urgency and they're trying to move quickly, move fast, right? Because time freaking kills deals. Competitors can get in there. Economic climate can change. I literally saw this happen with one of my old colleagues. He had a deal that was like ready to be signed. It was sitting on their desk. They were hours away from signing it. Company announcement came out saying, share price has tanked, profit wasn't where we expected it to be for the quarter, and the prospect basically said, nah, we've got a freeze on all spending. They were like 2 hours away from freaking signing this contract. That is how important it is. If the deal is at that stage, you are pushing to fucking get that paperwork in, processed, contracts done. Like, you want to just close that thing as quickly as possible, right? Because time freaking kills deals, man. And close when the excitement and acknowledgement of pain is high, right? So especially in small business sales, it's all about time and excitement, right? The longer time goes, the lower excitement gets. The more the excitement is up, you want to try to close them at that point. When people are excited and energetic and they're ready to say yes, and they're in that mood of wanting to say yes, you just nudge them into that yes, right? And that's not manipulative. That is just good salesmanship, because at the end of the day, if you have a good product and it solves the pain and it does it well, why the hell shouldn't they buy, right? That should be your attitude. Your attitude should be they should buy. They absolutely should be customers, right? So you've got to have that attitude when you're getting deals done, and don't let time screw your deals around. Now, let's get into the process that you should be using. Now, there is a few components here. I will go into this to the best of my ability, but you got to understand that the sales process itself, like the nuances of the sales process, will be different for your company. Okay, so do the best that you can to interpret it. If you're really struggling or you want some further help, feel free to book a call. That my team should have had a link in the description box below. No obligations to work with me, but we do have a mentorship program, and our clients get massive results, 5-6 figures in commissions in their first few years in tech sales, and that's what we stand by and we can make happen. So if you really need help, drop a time in the calendar. No obligations, but we can have a chat. Now, let's get into the sales process. Firstly, obviously, secure meeting with outbounding. I'll reiterate this again. If you're an SMB account executive, you probably won't have an SDR unless you're really lucky. And if you have an SDR as an SMB account executive, you've been more lucky than I was. I had to do all of my own outbounding. So securing meeting with outbounding, go look at the prospecting stuff that really goes into that in detail. The next part is you execute your discovery. I'll go into what discovery execution needs to look like. There is a very specific way of going through discovery execution. So I'll talk to you about all of that in the next subsequent videos. Goal of the discovery, finding pain and urgency. Very straightforward. Pitch your compelling proposition to create excitement. The reason I tend to do this as a small business rep, I wouldn't do this, by the way, if I was an enterprise rep. I'd do discovery slightly differently. But as a small business rep, I like to do this because you want to be volumetric, right? Like in 1 to 2 calls, you want to be very quickly validating, is there legitimate pain? Is there legitimate urgency? Can these people freaking do anything? Do they have do they have the ability to buy our lowest product at least, right? So when it comes to pricing, I talk about good, better, and best. That's the way in which you can present pricing, so you can give them a range, and so you know what's real, what's not, and so you want to very quickly in the first couple of phases of the sales process get to all of that. But anyways, going back to discovery, that's what you do in discovery. I'll go into discovery further. The next stage, execute demo. You want to have a really compelling demo. You want to have a sexy demo, a demo that gets them to lean in. The best way to do that is take the pain and the urgency from the discovery and unpack what are the capabilities that you have that align really well to that pain and urgency, right? So when I was selling CrowdStrike, I would listen to all of their pain. I would then brief my engineer, and then I would sit down with my engineer before the demo and say, dude, I think based off what they shared, we should show them this, this, and this, and then an optional will show them this. And what it means is demos are highly contextualized. And so it's almost like people are going to show up to that demo and go, wow, like this person is showing me exactly what I need. And it's like, no shit, right? You listen in the discovery and you replay that back to them in the form of solutions that are aligned to their problem in the demo. So that's how you do really sexy demos. Again, I will show you demo mechanics. I've got a video that I will do on that in terms of how to actually do it. A lot of account executives get demos wrong, man. A lot of account executives get demos wrong. So on that demo as well, towards the end of the demo, we want to do a quick validation check, right? So again, if you were doing a mid-market sales cycle, this step would be split out. So I would usually do execution of a demo, and then I'd have a post-demo feedback meeting, which is essentially a project viability meeting. Again, if you're doing small business sales, you want to get through this fast. You don't want to fuck around, right? So once you've given them some value, you want to start to qualify some questions. So what I would usually do is leave about 10 minutes at the end of the demo, get a little bit of feedback from them, and then quickly qualify the validity of this project with a bit of a good, better, and best scenario for pricing, right? So I'd have a single slide, I'd flash it up, and I'd say, hey, look, prior to moving forward, I just want to make sure that you're not in the dark about what this looks like in terms of dollars. So here's a rough idea of some numbers in terms of our lowest, medium, and our highest options. But what you want to do is you want to present that. You want to present that and then get their thoughts, right? And if they look at it and go, yeah, actually, that's pretty palatable. Yeah, we can do that. We can do something there, and this looks like it solves our problem. Good, right? Because now you've got pain, you've got urgency, and you've got viability. Then you can throw in a couple of additional questions in this phase, which is, hey, how does the budgeting process work, right? So that's a question I'd usually ask. If I was softening that question a little bit, I'd say, look, not to get too far ahead, but just for sanity's sake, how does budgets work in your organization? Is it pretty straightforward, or is it a bit of a complex process? What does that look like internally for you? And then they'll usually tell you, look, I've got budget, or hey, no, I don't personally have budget, but CEO just has to say yes. Say, fantastic. What do they usually need to see? What makes them comfortable? Do they need to be involved? Very quickly, you can start to figure out, right? Like, what is the route to getting dollars out of them? I will show you the pricing stuff later. I've got some slides around that. Then you want to be executing the validation event. Now, prior to the validation event, right? And so again, if you are doing a proof of concept, and like I will talk about how to actually run demos and deal viability meetings, and how to do SMB go no go meetings. Like, that is coming later. But typically what you want to do is at the end of this stage, you want to very smoothly set up the go no go meeting. You want to very smoothly get executive access. Again, I will show you the exact talk track that you can use to secure this meeting. So it's pretty idiot proof, but you secure those next steps. You get access to the executive over here, if there is an executive, if there is someone that needs to ultimately say yes, and that's not the person you're talking to. Best case scenario, the person you're talking to in a small business is the person that says yes, right? Which is why I'm a big fan of prospecting as high as you can in the organization, right? Like, you got to understand, a lot of small business account executives have a lot of fear around calling senior execs in a business, right? Like, I have seen salespeople trying to call CEOs absolutely crumble. But you got to understand, a CEO is a business professional, and their only job is to solve problems. So if you have a problem that you can solve for, and they have that problem, dude, they will want to talk to you like immediately. They'll be like, okay, I get that you reached out to me, you cold call me, I appreciate the hustle, and yes, I do have this problem, let's chat. Like, I've literally had CEOs say that to me. I've cold called so many CEOs. When I was at Gartner, I was selling to CEOs, right? Like, I was on the vendor side of the Gartner business. I was selling to CEOs. It's a fun conversation. So going back to this stage, if you are not dealing with the economic buyer, there's an opportunity for you to get access to the economic buyer, which I'll show you. If you are dealing with the economic buyer, fantastic. You can actually skip the go no go meeting, right? So if you've done your job right early in the sales cycle, you can skip this stage, go straight to the validation event. The validation event, The validation event is basically your proof of value. And what you want to do prior to kicking off the validation event, I'll just add this in there, send commercials before kicking off POV. And the reason you want to do that is because once you kick off a proof of value, you want to speed your time to close as much as possible. You don't want to have additional time wasted in sending quotes after the proof of value is complete. Again, time kills deals. So prior to kicking off the proof of value, if they say, yep, we want to go ahead, we want to test the solution, if all goes well, we'd be ready to move ahead. You say, fantastic. In the meantime, let me send you the MSA, let me send you the terms and conditions, let me send you a couple of quotes so you can start to have a look and a bit of a review. Proof of value kicks off, things go well. All you got to do is ask them during that proof of value, hey, we've fulfilled the criteria. Are you guys happy? It sounds like you guys are happy. Are you guys ready to move ahead? Right? Straight into the close. That is how you close small business deals. It's all about speed, thoroughness, and volume. Okay, so that's the secret. The process obviously changes when you're selling to bigger accounts. Now, I will go into the component parts of this. Don't worry. I've literally just given you like the high level overview. There is nuance to all of this. I will share what that looks like. But at this stage, this should be enough for you to be dangerous to at least understand what that high level process looks like. We will continue on. The next one that I'm going to dive into is how to run discovery. So we're going to start to then in the next few videos go into each of these areas in detail. So I'll start to give you talk tracks. I'll start to give you flow of the call or the meeting, how it looks, what you do when you close out the meeting, what you do to prep for the next one, etc., etc. Anyways, hope that was useful. All the links should be in the description to get the assets that I've shown. So go ahead, download those, rewatch this video, make tons of notes, drop any questions that you have. If I can make the time to respond, I'll try to respond to as many of them, but drop them in the comment section. I am pretty good at reviewing them at least once a week across all videos. And if you have any like super burning questions, we should have some slots open for strategy sessions. So book some time in my calendar. My team should have the link down below as well. Anyways, see you on the next one.